Welcome, everyone, to a story that might initially sound unbelievable, yet sadly reflects a persistent reality in modern society. How profoundly blinding can prejudice be, and what unfolds when such blindness collides with an undeniable truth? Join us as we unveil this narrative, piece by piece, to discover the answer. Have you ever witnessed an act of blatant racism that ignited a firestorm of anger and helplessness within you? Do you believe that individuals holding the highest echelons of power in society could still fall victim to bigotry simply because of the color of their skin? Whether your answer is yes or even no, this story will compel you to engage in profound reflection. Stay with us to see what transpires when a passenger on an airplane dares to demand the removal of a black man, only to later realize that man is none other than a justice of the Supreme Court. Flight AA-247, en route from the bustling metropolis of New York City to the sun-drenched sprawl of Los Angeles, was soaring at an altitude exceeding 30,000 feet. The late afternoon sun, a molten orb beginning its descent towards the horizon, streamed through the small, rectangular windows of the aircraft, casting elongated shadows across the faces of the passengers. Some were lost in the pages of novels, others diligently tapped away at their laptops, while a few simply gazed out at the seemingly endless expanse of the sky, lost in their own thoughts. A veneer of calm and quietude had settled over the cabin, a familiar ambience on long-haul flights, punctuated only by the gentle hum of the engines and the occasional soft chime indicating a call for a flight attendant. This tranquil atmosphere, however, was about to be violently shattered. A shrill, indignant voice, laced with an unmistakable tone of anger and entitlement, suddenly cut through the air, disrupting the peaceful rhythm of the journey. "I cannot believe this. Why is he sitting here? He doesn't belong in this section." The voice belonged to a middle-aged man, his temples dusted with silver, his face rapidly turning an alarming shade of red. He was pointing a trembling finger, not subtly, but with an accusatory flourish, towards a black man seated in the coveted expanse of first class, specifically in an aisle seat close to the main walkway. The black man, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blue suit that spoke of quiet confidence and understated elegance, was deeply engrossed in a thick, leather-bound book. The title, embossed in gold lettering, glinted momentarily in the sunlight. The Federalist Papers. Startled by the sudden outburst and the accusatory gesture directed his way, the black man slowly lifted his gaze from the weighty tome. His eyes, dark and intelligent, held a depth that seemed to penetrate the surface, and they met the furious glare of the middle-aged man with a calm, almost questioning intensity. A subtle furrow appeared on his brow, a flicker of surprise momentarily crossing his otherwise composed features. "Sir." The black man's voice was a low, resonant baritone, possessing a timbre that suggested authority and composure. It carried just enough volume to be heard over the murmuring that had begun to ripple through the first-class cabin, yet it remained devoid of any hint of aggression. "Is there something I can help you with? Help me? You're the one who needs help. What are you even doing here? This is first class. This isn't some kind of community bus. People like you don't just sit here." The middle-aged man's voice rose in volume with each word, the pitch becoming increasingly strident and unpleasant. His words, dripping with thinly veiled prejudice, hung heavy in the air, causing a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Heads began to turn, conversations ceased, and a collective sense of unease spread through the cabin. Passengers, initially startled, now exchanged nervous glances, their curiosity and apprehension growing with each passing moment. a young flight attendant, her face betraying a hint of nervousness beneath a professionally composed smile, swiftly made her way towards the escalating commotion. Her steps were light and quick as she navigated the narrow aisle, her eyes scanning the scene to assess the situation. "Excuse me, gentlemen," she interjected, her voice carefully modulated to be both polite and assertive. "Is everything all right here?" I heard some raised voices. "All right?" "No, nothing is all right," the middle-aged man snapped, his attention now momentarily diverted towards the flight attendant. This individual here clearly doesn't belong in first class. I saw him sneaking through the gate back at JFK. I'm telling you, he's a fraud. You need to remove him from this section immediately." He punctuated his demand with another emphatic, accusatory point towards the black man, his finger almost jabbing the air. The black man, who had remained seated throughout the outburst, his posture still dignified despite the unwarranted accusations, let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. He carefully placed his book on the small table that folded out from the armrest. His movements were deliberate and unhurried, a stark contrast to the agitated state of his accuser. He then turned his attention to the flight attendant, his dark eyes conveying a mixture of patience and perhaps a touch of weariness. "Madam," he addressed her calmly, his voice a soothing balm against the harshness of the other man's tone. "I assure you, I possess a valid first-class ticket for seat 3A. I presented it to the gate agent during boarding, and again to the flight attendant who greeted me at the aircraft door." He maintained eye contact with the flight attendant, his expression open and sincere. "Lies. All lies. I saw him. He was loitering around the economy section. Then he suddenly darted through when the gate agent was distracted. Don't believe a word he says." The middle-aged man was relentless, his voice escalating once more, fueled by what seemed to be an unshakable conviction in his prejudiced assumptions. His accusations grew more vehement, his body language more aggressive, as he leaned forward in his seat, his face contorted with anger and disdain. A palpable tension filled the first-class cabin. The hushed murmurs among the other passengers intensified, their eyes darting between the two men and the increasingly flustered flight attendant. Some passengers subtly shifted in their seats, their expressions ranging from concern to outright disapproval of the middle-aged man's behavior. The black man, despite the barrage of insults and accusations, maintained an outward appearance of composure, but a subtle tightening around his jaw and a flicker of something akin to disappointment in his deep-set eyes hinted at the underlying impact of the encounter. He held the gaze of the middle-aged man for a moment longer, a silent acknowledgement of the unwarranted hostility directed his way, before turning his attention back to the flight attendant, awaiting her response. The scene was set, the initial pieces of the puzzle laid bare, promising a confrontation that would reveal far more than just a dispute over an airline seat. The journey, it seemed, was about to become much more turbulent than anyone had anticipated. The tension escalates as the unfounded accusations persist, pushing the situation towards the precipice of an unwanted confrontation and forcing the flight attendant into an uncomfortable position of verification. "Sir," the young flight attendant began, her voice carefully maintaining a professional tone despite the palpable awkwardness of the situation. She addressed the middle-aged man directly, hoping to de-escalate the rapidly escalating conflict. "As I mentioned, I would be happy to double-check the passenger's boarding pass to ensure everything is in order." She then turned her attention with a polite smile towards the black man. "Sir, would you mind if I just quickly scanned your boarding pass again?" It's just standard procedure. The black man nodded calmly, reaching into the inside pocket of his impeccably tailored suit jacket. He retrieved his smartphone, its sleek surface reflecting the cabin lights, and brought up the electronic boarding pass on the screen. With a smooth, practiced gesture, he offered the phone to the flight attendant. The flight attendant took the phone, her fingers hovering momentarily over the screen before she expertly tapped the scanner application on her own handheld device. The familiar beep of the scanner echoed softly in the tense silence of the first-class cabin. Her eyes scanned the information displayed on her device, comparing it to the details on the black man's phone. A moment stretched into what felt like an eternity as she meticulously checked the name, flight number, date, and, most importantly, the seat assignment. Finally, she looked up, her expression neutral but with a subtle hint of resolution. She handed the phone back to the black man with a polite nod. "Sir, thank you. Everything appears to be perfectly in order. You are indeed in seat 3A, first class." She then turned back to the middle-aged man, her smile now a little less warm, a touch more firm. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying a note of professional authority, "I have confirmed that this passenger is correctly seated in first class with a valid ticket. I must ask you to please refrain from making further unfounded accusations and to allow him to enjoy his flight. See, I told you, he must have some kind of fake ticket or something. You can't just take his word for it." The middle-aged man sputtered, his face now a mask of disbelief and simmering anger. He threw his hands up in exasperation, his voice laced with indignation. "This is ridiculous. I've flown first class for years, and I know who belongs here and who doesn't. This is an outrage." A low murmur of disapproval rippled through the other first-class passengers. Several of them exchanged pointed glances at the middle-aged man, their expressions clearly conveying their discomfort and disapproval of his blatant prejudice. One elderly woman sitting across the aisle even let out a quiet tisk of disapproval. The black man, who had been observing the exchange with a quiet dignity, finally decided to speak again. His voice, though still calm, now carried a subtle edge of steel. "Sir," he said, his eyes meeting the furious gaze of the middle-aged man, "with all due respect, your assumptions about who belongs in first class are not only offensive but also entirely baseless. I have worked hard and earned the right to travel in this manner. Your prejudice is showing, and it is not a pleasant sight." "Oh, I'm prejudiced now, am I?" The middle-aged man scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "No, I'm just stating the obvious. Look at him. He doesn't fit the profile of a first-class passenger. It's as simple as that." The blatantness of the middle-aged man's prejudice hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. The other passengers in first class were now openly displaying their discomfort, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering amongst themselves. The flight attendant, visibly flustered by the man's continued belligerence, was clearly struggling to maintain control of the situation. She placed a hand gently on the middle-aged man's arm. "Sir, I understand you may have concerns, but I have verified the passenger's ticket, and everything is in order. If you continue to disrupt the peace and comfort of the other passengers, I may be forced to take further action." Her voice, though still polite, now carried a firm undertone, indicating that her patience was wearing thin. The middle-aged man, however, seemed impervious to her attempts at reasoning. He glared at the black man, his eyes filled with a toxic mixture of suspicion and resentment. He seemed determined to escalate the situation, fueled by his deeply ingrained biases. The black man, in contrast, remained a picture of composure, his steady gaze and calm demeanor serving as a stark contrast to the other man's agitated state. The tension in the cabin was palpable, a tightly wound spring threatening to snap at any moment. Just as the situation teeters on the brink of a full-blown confrontation, an unexpected voice of reason and authority cuts through the charged atmosphere, introducing a pivotal turning point in the unfolding drama. Just as the flight attendant was about to reiterate her warning, a distinct voice, calm yet carrying an unmistakable air of authority and intellect, resonated from the rear of the first-class cabin. "Excuse me, sir. I believe it's time for you to cease this behavior." All eyes swiveled towards the speaker. It was another middle-aged man, this one Caucasian, impeccably dressed in a dark, well-tailored suit and wearing distinguished-looking spectacles perched on the bridge of his nose. He had a thoughtful expression on his face, his gaze steady and direct as he addressed the agitated passenger. He rose from his seat, located a few rows behind the black man, and began to walk slowly but purposefully towards the unfolding scene. His demeanor exuded a quiet confidence that commanded attention. "And who are you? This is none of your business," the initially aggressive middle-aged man snapped, his face contorting with annoyance at this new interruption. He seemed unwilling to back down, even in the face of potential social disapproval. "Actually," the second middle-aged man replied calmly, his voice measured and even, "I believe it is my business, as it is the business of every decent person on this flight. I am a passenger here, just like everyone else, and I have been observing your conduct. Your repeated accusations and, frankly, your blatant prejudice towards this gentleman are completely unacceptable." He stopped a few feet away from the two men, his presence adding a new layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. "Mind your own business, buddy. I have a right to say what I think." "This is America," the first man retorted, his voice rising in volume and taking on a more defensive tone. He seemed to be digging his heels in, unwilling to acknowledge the inappropriateness of his behavior. "You certainly have the right to express your opinions," the second man conceded, his tone still even and reasonable. "However, that right does not extend to harassing and demeaning another individual based solely on the color of their skin. I witnessed this gentleman present a valid first-class boarding pass. You have absolutely no legitimate reason to question his presence here or to subject him to such disrespectful treatment." He gestured calmly towards the black man, his eyes conveying a silent message of support and solidarity. The first middle-aged man seemed momentarily taken aback by the unexpected and articulate challenge to his behavior. He shifted uncomfortably under the collective gaze of the other first-class passengers, many of whom were now openly nodding in agreement with the second man's words. He glanced around, noticing the palpable shift in the social dynamic, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face for the first time. The intervention of the second middle-aged man served as a significant turning point in the escalating drama. His calm yet firm demeanor and his articulate condemnation of the racist behavior had a noticeable impact on the atmosphere in the first-class cabin. The flight attendant visibly relaxed, a sense of relief washing over her face. The other passengers seemed emboldened by this display of solidarity, their expressions now conveying a clearer sense of disapproval towards the prejudiced man. However, the initially aggressive passenger was far from conceding defeat. He still harbored a deep-seated resentment, evident in the tight set of his jaw and the narrowed gaze he directed towards both the black man and his defender. He muttered something under his breath, a string of unintelligible words laced with frustration and anger. The tension in the cabin, though somewhat diffused, still lingered, a silent testament to the deeply ingrained prejudices that had fueled the initial outburst. The black man, throughout this exchange, had remained seated, his expression thoughtful and observant. He watched the interaction unfold, his silence speaking volumes in the face of the surrounding turmoil. The stage was now set for the next layer of the story to be revealed, a layer that would undoubtedly expose the true depth of the situation. Can the undeniable truth shatter deeply ingrained prejudice? And what will be the ultimate cost the racist passenger must pay for his blinding bigotry? The black man, who had remained seated with an air of quiet dignity throughout the exchange between the first passenger and his defender, finally rose to his feet. He adjusted the knot of his silk tie with a deliberate, almost imperceptible movement, his gaze steady and unwavering as he finally addressed the man who had subjected him to such unwarranted hostility. His posture was erect, his shoulders squared, and an aura of quiet authority emanated from him. "Sir," he began, his voice still remarkably calm and measured, yet now imbued with a gravitas that commanded attention. The subtle hint of weariness that had flickered in his eyes earlier had been replaced by a firm resolve. "Perhaps you are unaware, but your words and actions here not only constitute a grave insult to me personally, but they also tread dangerously close to violating federal law. I am Clarence Thomas." A hush fell over the first-class cabin, so profound that the gentle hum of the aircraft engines seemed to amplify in the sudden silence. The middle-aged man who had been so vociferously making accusations stood frozen, his mouth agape, his face draining of color until it was ashen. His eyes widened in disbelief, darting between the composed figure of Justice Thomas and the stunned faces of the other passengers. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Heads swiveled, and a wave of murmuring and hushed whispers began to spread as the other passengers processed the gravity of the revelation. Some passengers instinctively reached for their phones, no doubt eager to document this extraordinary encounter. The elderly woman who had earlier sked now covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and understanding. The second middle-aged man, who had intervened earlier, simply nodded slowly, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. The young flight attendant nearly dropped the tablet she was holding. Her carefully maintained professional composure completely crumbled, replaced by a look of utter shock and mortification. She stammered, her voice barely a whisper, "Hey, Justice Thomas? I am so incredibly sorry for this inconvenience." Her eyes darted nervously towards the still frozen passenger, then back to Justice Thomas, her face a picture of utter dismay. Justice Thomas offered the flight attendant a small, reassuring smile. "It's quite all right, young lady. You handled the situation as best you could. The issue, as you can see, lies elsewhere." He turned his attention back to the middle-aged man, who was still standing as if rooted to the spot, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. I had no idea. The middle-aged man stammered, his voice a mere croak, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by a palpable fear and embarrassment. He seemed utterly incapable of forming a coherent sentence, his mind struggling to process the implications of his egregious error in judgment. His eyes darted around the cabin, meeting the shocked and often disapproving gazes of his fellow passengers. "Perhaps," Justice Thomas continued, his voice calm but carrying a weight of moral authority, You might consider thinking more carefully before making assumptions about individuals based solely on the color of their skin. Ignorance and prejudice are burdens that harm not only those who are targeted but also those who carry them. His words, spoken with quiet conviction, hung heavy in the air, a stark indictment of the man's bigotry. The middle-aged man finally seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping, his gaze fixed on the carpeted floor of the aircraft. The bravado and entitlement that had characterized his earlier behavior had completely vanished, replaced by a profound sense of shame and belated regret. He mumbled a barely audible apology, his voice choked with humiliation. The flight attendant, regaining some semblance of her professional demeanor, gently guided the now thoroughly chastened man back towards the economy section, where he would undoubtedly face the silent judgment and perhaps even open condemnation of the other passengers. As he shuffled down the aisle, his head bowed in shame, the stark contrast between his earlier arrogance and his current humiliation was palpable. Justice Thomas, with a sigh that was barely perceptible, returned to his seat. He picked up his copy of the Federalist Papers, his fingers gently tracing the embossed title, and resumed reading, as if the preceding events were merely an unfortunate, albeit significant, interruption to his journey. However, despite his outward composure, a profound sadness lingered in the depths of his eyes, a silent testament to the enduring sting of prejudice, even for someone in his position. The other first-class passengers, having witnessed the dramatic turn of events, settled back into their seats, a palpable shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The earlier tension had been replaced by a sense of quiet contemplation, the weight of the encounter settling upon them. This story serves as a potent and timely reminder of the insidious nature of prejudice and the enduring harm caused by racial discrimination. As the insightful writer James Baldwin once eloquently stated, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." The blinding prejudice of the middle-aged passenger nearly led to a deeply regrettable situation, and it was only the revelation of the undeniable truth that forced him to confront the error of his ways. This narrative also underscores the sobering reality that no one, regardless of their status or position in society, is immune to the sting of bigotry. The crucial takeaway is the imperative for each of us to cultivate an open heart and an empathetic mind, to judge individuals based on their character and actions, rather than resorting to the lazy and destructive trap of preconceived notions and narrow-minded stereotypes. If you found this story thought-provoking and impactful, please do not hesitate to share it with your friends, family, and social networks. Let us collectively amplify messages of equality, respect, and understanding. By engaging in open conversations and challenging prejudice wherever we encounter it, we can contribute to building a more just and equitable society for all. And if you are eager to explore more compelling and insightful narratives that delve into the complexities of the human experience, we encourage you to subscribe to our channel and explore our growing library of videos. Click on the video currently displayed on your screen to embark on another journey of discovery and reflection. Thank you for watching.